Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Friday the 3rd of February. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 345 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition, and then I will bring you today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. President Volodymyr Zelensky said today that Ukraine would fight to hold on to the eastern fortress city of Bakhmut for as long as it could, and urged the West to supply long-range weapons to help Kyiv push Russian forces out of the Donbass. Senior EU officials, including the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, the European Council President Charles Michel, and 15 European commissioners, have travelled to the Ukrainian capital for talks. The EU leaders are expected to persuade Ukraine to take a more realistic view of the EU membership timetable, while avoiding negative public statements that could weaken morale or damage Zelensky's efforts to project a European future for Ukrainians. President Zelensky has called for more punitive EU measures against Russia, but new sanctions the bloc is preparing are likely to fall short of his government's demands. The Prosecutor General's office of Ukraine has pressed criminal charges against Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner group of mercenaries fighting on the Russian side in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said that Russia's war in Ukraine would continue as the Donbass was not fully protected yet. Germany has approved a delivery of Leopard 1 main battle tanks to Ukraine from industrial stocks, a government spokesperson, Stefan Hebestreit, has said. Russian-installed authorities in Crimea said today that they had nationalised about 500 properties in the peninsula, including some belonging to senior Ukrainian politicians and business figures. NATO has called on Russia to fulfil its obligations under the START nuclear reductions treaty. Norway will order 54 new German-made Leopard 2 tanks for its army from the Krause Maffei group, the Norwegian public broadcaster NRK has reported today. Traders are using Turkey, Kazakhstan and Armenia to evade European Union sanctions on Russia in a tactic that breaches these countries' compliance with the bloc's embargo. That's what the Latvia's Prime Minister has said. The head of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games has said it is for the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, to decide whether Russian and Belarusian athletes can compete in the Games next year. Konstantin Yefremov, a senior Russian lieutenant who's fled after serving in Ukraine, has described how his country's troops tortured prisoners of war and threatened some with rape. And a state-of-the-art missile defence system provided by Italy and France should be up and running in Ukraine within 2 months, Italy's Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani has said. The Scottish Government's Resilience Committee, SCORE, has met again to discuss the challenges facing health and social care this winter. Chaired by the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, the meeting focused on hospital occupancy and the measures being taken to reduce levels of delayed discharge and to find care placements and packages for those clinically fit to leave hospital. The most recent A&E statistics have shown a continued improvement in performance, with 70.1% of people being admitted, transferred or discharged within 4 hours. That's the best performance since May 2022. Additional funding has been made available to health and social care partnerships who have the responsibility of providing care packages for those in their locality, to provide 300 interim care home beds for people who no longer need to be in hospital. So far, 162 people have entered interim care facilities paid for using this additional funding. The Resilience Committee meeting was also attended by the Health Secretary, other Cabinet Ministers, the Chief Medical Officer, and senior representatives from NHS boards, COSLA, Integration Joint Boards, and the Scottish Ambulance Service. The First Minister said, "The continued improvement in A&E performance is something to be welcomed, but there is still much work being done on safely freeing up hospital capacity and easing pressures elsewhere in the system. That is why we are continuing to pursue a range of measures to enable people to leave hospital as soon as possible when it is clinically safe for them to do so. We remain indebted to the health and social care staff in all parts of Scotland, who have continued to do an outstanding job despite the extra challenges that winter has presented. The Bank of England is alive to the risk of pushing interest rates too high, its chief economist has signalled, adding to expectations that it could be nearing the end of a sustained period of rate rises. Speaking one day after the bank raised interest rates for a 10th successive time by 0.5 percentage points to 4%, Hugh Pill said that the full impact of its rate increases had not yet been felt in the UK economy. On a radio programme this morning, Mr Pill said, "It is important we do enough to attain our objective to return inflation to within the 2% target." Adding, "But of course it is also important that we guard against the possibility of doing too much. We need to keep that Zen-like balance on our objective. We have to recognise that we have done a lot with monetary policy already. Interest rates have risen by almost 400 basis points over little more than a year. And given the lags in the transmission of monetary policy, there is quite a lot of effects of those rises still to come through. There is a lot of policy in the pipeline." Pill said that the welcome fall in wholesale gas prices, after a period when soaring prices fueled higher energy bills and have been a major factor in pushing UK headline inflation to its current rate of 10.5%, will be felt by households and will help to cool inflation to 3.5% by the end of 2023. He said inflation should be back within the bank's 2% target range by the middle of next year, but warned that care needs to be taken to ensure that companies don't become accustomed to inflation-driving behaviour. It is also important to recognise that the committee signalled the need for continued watchfulness. It especially emphasised that it was watchful for signs of further persistence in inflation, the type of inflation that might become embedded in price-setting behaviour or wage-setting behaviour and threaten to keep inflation elevated on a more lasting basis. That is the type of concern we had, the type of concern we still have. Mr Pill also said that the Bank of England had not seen any positive economic impact as a result of the UK leaving the EU. He said that while it remains too early to tell what the ultimate economic impact would be, the first 3 years since Brexit had led to the Bank of England's forecast of a 3 to 3.5% drop in UK productivity because of trade disruption over a 15-year horizon beginning to happen at a faster rate than expected. The bank is expecting the UK to enter recession during 2023. Plans to house asylum seekers in a Pontins holiday park in northwest England will not now go ahead, according to reports. The facility outside Southport in Merseyside was reported to have been considered by the Home Office for housing asylum seekers who are waiting for their claims to be assessed as an alternative to hotels. Sefton Council, the responsible local authority, is understood to have raised a number of objections, including the logistics of accessing the site and the impact on tourism. The UK government is keen to cut spending on hotels to house asylum seekers, which the government says is costing £6.8 million per day. The UK Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, is hunting for larger alternative sites that would be cheaper, including former university accommodation, holiday parks such as Pontins, and surplus military sites like the controversial Napier Barracks in Kent. The Home Office's first attempt to set up such a centre at RAF Linton-on-Ouse in North Yorkshire was halted due to local opposition, including from Conservative politicians, and the threat of legal challenges. Since then, no other firm plans have emerged. Tens of thousands of disabled people across the UK were wrongly deprived of their benefits by the Department for Work and Pensions and now could share in compensation, potentially totalling about £150 million after an appeal court ruling. Lawyers for two disabled men who first took the DWP to court 5 years ago have written to the government asking them to set out how they will compensate them and others who were left hundreds of pounds out of pocket each year after being moved onto universal credit. The Court of Appeal blocked an attempt by the DWP to overturn a High Court ruling made a year ago which confirmed that the claimants identified only as TP and AR were unlawfully discriminated against when the DWP refused to repay their monthly benefit losses in full. The appeal court decision, issued last month, brings to an end a lengthy legal process in which the DWP was criticised for wasting public funds and court time on defending policies that unlawfully impoverished thousands of vulnerable people. Before they were transferred onto Universal Credit in 2016 and 2017 respectively, TP and AR received severe disability premium and enhanced disability premium payments worth £178 a month, which helped them to meet the extra costs of living alone without a carer. Having to move house created a change of circumstances, which meant that they were automatically transferred to Universal Credit. TP had moved on clinical advice after he was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and AR, who suffered from mental illness, was forced by the bedroom tax to find a cheaper home. Although DWP officials advised that under transitional relief rules they would not be out of pocket under Universal Credit, they found that in fact they were £178 a month worse off and were blocked from going back onto their old benefits. This left them struggling to meet their routine care needs. The pair successfully challenged the reduced compensation benefit payments in the High Court in 2018, but when the DWP offered them compensation for the loss of SDP but not enhanced disability premium, meaning that they would receive £120 a month rather than the £180 a month they had lost, they returned to the courts, with the High Court finding in their favour in January 2022. Evidence provided to the courts by the DWP indicated that 50,000 claimants were losing out by £60 a month, while the cost of providing transitional relief to a similarly affected claimant moved on to Universal Credit would cost up to £150 million over a 6-year period up to 2024-25. While the ruling was made in the jurisdiction of England and Wales, because this DWP policy applies across the UK, the judgment will apply likewise. A fire service chief has been accused of desperate tactics after pleading for firefighters in Northern Ireland to respond to high-risk calls during any strikes, so that the army are not asked to cover emergencies in the region. The Fire Brigades Union said the request showed that the government and managers were clearly rattled by a vote last week in favour of strike action. Fire services in parts of the UK are expected to ask the army to cover for striking firefighters if, as expected, they take action as early as the end of this month. However, a request for troops to go into Northern Ireland raises serious security concerns. Dissident Republicans have said in the past that they would target any British troops who returned to the island of Ireland. Northern Ireland's interim chief fire officer, Andy Hearn, called for all FBU council members to fully appreciate and recognise the unique circumstances in Northern Ireland and agree to special arrangements to negate the need for military resources during any period of strike action. Mr. Hearn said, "I strongly believe it is in the interest of all stakeholders, especially at this time in Northern Ireland, to pursue special arrangements for striking firefighters in Northern Ireland. Should agreement not be reached with the Fire Brigades Union Executive Council next week, a request for military aid to civil authority will reluctantly remain a viable option." Civil servants in Northern Ireland raised the possibility of seeking cover from the armed forces in December and January as they discussed how to respond to an expected ballot in favour of a strike in the region. The region's fire service has asked the union on several occasions to promise emergency cover, but the union is not minded to do so. Each region can negotiate a separate settlement with the union. It is understood that the union has not received a formal increased pay offer from Hearn or his colleagues. The FBU's chief executive, Matt Rack, said, "This intervention shows how disastrously government ministers and fire service employers have handled the pay claim from firefighters. Mr. Hearn is well aware that the answer is for fire service employers, including the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service, to urgently make a new offer to significantly increase the pay of all firefighters across the UK. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, the world's single largest investor, has warned company directors it will vote against their re-election to the boards if they do not up their game on tackling the climate crisis, human rights abuses, and boardroom diversity. Karine Smith-Echenacho, the Chief Governance and Compliance Officer of Norges Bank Investment Management, which manages more than 13 trillion Norwegian kroner on behalf of the Norwegian people, that's about £1 trillion, said the fund was preparing to vote against the re-election of at least 80 company boards for failing to set or hit environmental or social targets. Established in the 1990s to invest surplus profits from Norway's huge oil and gas reserves, it is the world's largest sovereign fund, controlling an average of 1.3% of 9,338 companies across 70 countries. Large holdings include Apple, Nestle, Microsoft, and Samsung. We all know we live in a world with a climate crisis, and we have a role to play, and then companies have a role to play, Smith-Echenacho said. So we have stepped up our expectations towards companies when it comes to setting targets to get to that net zero emissions by the 2050 target. And we will push the companies more on setting targets and understanding how they're going to get there. The warning comes as the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre, bowed to public pressure to release more money from its oil profits to help support Ukraine. The country donated 10 billion krona in civilian and military aid last year. We are in a situation where we have room for action due to extraordinary income from the petroleum sector, he said. We are now stepping up this aid. We will contribute even more to the repair and reconstruction of damaged infrastructure. The fund, which holds the equivalent of about 2.4 million krona, that's about £200,000, for every man, woman and child in Norway, invests parts of the large profits generated by the Norwegian petroleum sector, mainly from taxes on companies, but also payment for licenses to explore for oil and gas, as well as the state's direct financial interest and dividends from the partly state-owned energy giant Equinor. Joe Johnson, Boris Johnson's younger brother, has resigned as a director of a London-based investment bank allegedly linked to the Indian billionaire Gautam Adani's crisis-ridden business empire. Lord Johnson, a former Conservative minister, who was given a peerage by his brother in 2020, has resigned from the board of Elara Capital on Wednesday, just days after Elara was accused of using Mauritius-based funds to manipulate the share price of Adani-linked companies and to obscure their ultimate ownership. Johnson, who's a former investment banker at Deutsche Bank and a journalist for the Financial Times, joined Elara Capital in June, in the hope of making a contribution to UK-India trade and investment ties. On Thursday, he said he had consistently received assurances from Elara Capital that it is compliant with its legal obligations and in good standing with regulatory bodies. Elara has been accused by short seller investment firm Hindenburg Research of helping Adani Group companies in an alleged share price manipulation and accounting fraud. Elara has not responded to media requests for comment. Adani Group has denied the allegations, which it describes as a malicious combination of selective misinformation and stale, baseless and discredited allegations. Before the accusations were published last week on Twitter, Adani, 60, was the world's third richest person, with an estimated $119.5 billion fortune. He has fallen to 11th place in the daily updated Bloomberg Billionaires Index after a personal wealth wipeout of $34 billion in just 4 days of trading since these accusations were published. This is the second time that Johnson has quit a position at a financial firm in recent months. In December, he resigned from a role advising Binance, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. A newly released audio recording offers a behind-the-scenes look at how ex-President Trump's campaign team, in a pivotal battleground state, knew that they had been outflanked by the Democrats in the 2020 presidential election, and despite acknowledging defeat, their recording shows that they decided to fan the flames of allegations of widespread fraud, costing Trump victory there, which were, of course, were ultimately debunked repeatedly by election officials and the courts. The audio, which is from the 5th of November 2020, 2 days after the election, has surfaced just as Trump is again seeking the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, while continuing to lie about the legitimacy of the outcome and Democrat Joe Biden's 2020 win. The Wisconsin political operatives in the strategy session even praised Democratic turnout efforts in the state's largest counties and appeared to joke about their efforts to engage black voters, according to the recording obtained by the Associated Press. The audio centers on Andrew Iverson, who was the head of Trump's campaign in the state. Here's the deal. Combs is going to continue to fan the flames and get the word out about Democrats trying to steal this election. We'll do whatever they need, just be on standby if there's any stunts we need to pull, Iverson says. Iverson is now the Midwest Regional Director for the Republican National Committee. He deferred questions about the meeting to the RNC, whose spokesperson, Keith Schipper, declined to comment because he had not heard the recording. A former campaign official and Republican operative who was in the meeting and recorded it provided a copy of the recording to Associated Press. The operative is not authorized to speak publicly about what was discussed, but spoke out because Trump is seeking the White House again. Wisconsin was a big part of Trump's victory in 2016, and his campaign fought hard to keep the swing state in 2020, but Biden defeated Trump by nearly 21,000 votes in Wisconsin. The result has withstood independent and partisan audits and reviews, as well as lawsuits and recounts in the state's two largest and Democratic-leaning counties. Projects supporting people most at risk of social isolation and loneliness will receive a share of almost £1 million support funding, which was announced today. The money will help provide warm spaces, hot meals, group activities, and fuel payments to people most at risk of isolation, including older people, younger parents, carers, and disabled people. Organisations to receive grants and funds include Age Scotland, who will continue to deliver their Keeping the Doors Open grants programme, and Chest, Heart and Stroke Scotland, who are recruiting Urdu and Punjabi-speaking volunteers to make kindness calls. The Equalities and Older People's Minister Christina McKelvey said, "Social isolation and loneliness can affect anyone, especially at this time of year when people can struggle to get outside and socialise. The pandemic and the cost of living crisis have increased isolation for some people, including young people, carers, and disabled people. This funding will be a lifeline for the range of organisations who are helping to keep people connected during this challenging time." 18 projects and organisations will receive a share of £971,019. They are Age Scotland, Befriending Networks, British Red Cross, Chest, Heart and Stroke Scotland, Glasgow Disability Allowance, Home Start Scotland, YouthLink Scotland, Cosgrove Care and Jewish Care Scotland, Faith and Community Dundee, the Glasgow Central Mosque Food Bank, Safe Families, the Bethany Christian Trust, Christians Against Poverty, the Scottish Achlobite Society, Sikhs in Scotland, the Church of Scotland, the Edinburgh City Mission, and the Glasgow City Mission. And stopping plastics from being incinerated is one of the key recommendations of an independent review of decarbonising the treatment of residual waste. The report, which follows last year's independent review of the role of incineration in Scotland, which recommended placing a cap on future capacity and led ministers putting restrictions on the development of further incinerators. The report author, Dr. Colin Church, has made several new recommendations to reduce the carbon impact of residual or black bag waste treatment infrastructure, including stopping plastic from being incinerated in Scotland. In addition, he has also recommended taking forward policies to reduce plastic production and use, promoting source segregation of all plastics and implementing advanced sorting to remove plastics from black bag waste, and using the heat from incinerators where possible, for example for homes and businesses. Dr. Church said, "Incineration remains a more climate-friendly method of managing residual waste than traditional landfill, and more practical than any other currently available approach. However, without further action, this advantage will erode over a relatively short time. That is why my second report sets out a series of recommendations to improve the carbon impact of residual waste treatment, of which the most urgent and potentially most impactful is the cessation this decade of the incineration of plastic." And that's all that we have for you this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station and to make new programmes. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of raising £30,000 to enable us to continue to pay the bills. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can also find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you will also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Please click on the wee bell. Now, we will be back at 12 noon on Sunday with the next edition of the Full Scottish, so please come back and join us then. But on this day in 1949, a 23-year-old Margaret Hilda Roberts was adopted as the Tory party candidate in Deptford, but she later failed to win the seat at the general election the following year. In 1948, she had applied for a job at ICI, but was rejected after the HR department assessed her as headstrong, obstinate, and dangerously self-opinionated. She was, of course, eventually elected Member of Parliament for Finchley in 1959. I wonder whatever happened to her. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this evening, and I hope that you have a very peaceful weekend. Bye-bye.